Welcome, everyone, to tonight's budget meeting. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And again, we have a rather lengthy agenda for tonight, so we should get right at it. And I would first like to introduce our budget co-chairs, Mrs. Nardolillo and Mr. Von Dell. And I'll take a motion to go into an open meeting of the Budget Committee. I'll take a motion for that. Mrs. Nardolillo and Mr. Von Dell seconds it, and all in favor. All right, thank you very much. Mr. Ford, do you want to begin tonight, or?
Yes, I will begin tonight. So, Jane, why don't we start off with putting up the presentation, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. And so why don't we go straight to the agenda here? And so this is the night we received over the April break. We received the final word on state aid and federal funding and how the two interface. So this is a night really where we really summarize our additions to the budget. Just like to note that since our last presentation, we have 3 additional staffing positions that we would like the board to consider. So we will be going through our state aid outlook, looking at the federal grant situation, and then we look bit by bit, review staffing, equipment, maintenance projects, interfund transfers, and new programs and initiatives. All of these have been put into our expenditure budget. We will review our revenue budget, our expenditures. We'll go over what the property tax cap calculation will be and what we will report to the state, and then we will review our budget calendar. So why don't we begin right away? And again, I think, now more than ever, our mission is so resonating and so important to us all. And so we realize in the after effects of the pandemic and the like that we really need to make strong connections with our students through their academic program, but also through a program that provides further social emotional growth and development. In addition to that, our teachers and our staff have performed so admirably this year, and we want to continue to build on their collective capacity to provide high quality educational services that are relevant, meaningful, and supportive to each and every child. So that was the lens through which we crafted our budget in 21-22. Let's go to the next slide. These 3 pillars, again, I think, as we come out of the pandemic and as we move forward and as we begin to rebuild and re-envision who we are, academic excellence, the identifying and addressing the continuity of learning and making that learning engaging and meaningful, and providing that learning as really a vehicle for our students to find their passions, to make connections with school and with one another. Equity. The pandemic has caused us to look even more closely at the gaps that exist within our educational system, not just in North County, but throughout the United States. So how do we close these gaps? How do we continue to strive and move closer to realizing our ideal of all means all when we provide opportunities for each and every child? And then again, coming out of the pandemic and rebuilding, we're looking at social emotional health. So ensuring student safety and well-being is really fundamental, because once that is in place, students can grow, students can make greater connections to their school community, to one another, to themselves, to discover their passions, and to really operate through schooling in a way that is going to maximize their potential because they feel safe, welcome, connected, and wanted in their school environment and in their community. So Ms. Fields shared this with us, and it's so relevant here as we look in our return from the pandemic. In this case, the 3 R's are relief, recovery, and rebuilding. So with relief, that's the initial response. That's the emergency response. That's the first response, really, the first responder. And that is provide us with the urgent resources so we can provide effective remote instruction and supports at scale during the pandemic. We pivoted, we made that adjustment, and it also appears that federal funding has recognized the need for this immediate, urgent first response. Recovery. So once we have looked at the impact of the pandemic, what are the additional investments we need to help us recover, to help students, schools, to make up lost ground, to reconnect, to recover lost learning? But I think fundamentally and at the part of it, how do we help them to reconnect to community and, again, with an eye on social emotional well-being? And then the last part is more visionary. It's longer lasting. It takes time. It takes reflection. We have to pause. We have to take a look at how do we begin to think about educating the entire child. And it's important that that notion of focusing on nurturing the whole child and meeting the entire needs of each and every child is important. So more than ever, we realize that our children are not just academic beings and that schooling is not an academic activity. That equally important, and maybe it's quite arguable more important, is the fact that social emotional skills, social emotional learning, social emotional skill development, ensuring that all children have access to this important learning is essential for life, is essential in the very immediate future for their successful learning and development and connection to school. So let's go to the next. So this is an update on New York State aid, and it really is quite, I would say, quite a different picture than we anticipated. We're very grateful to our local state legislators. In this case, it's Assemblyman Steck and Senator Breslin, who are strong advocates for education in North Colony, and to all members of the New York State legislature who really showed by their action and their votes that they put education first and foremost at the front of their agenda. So this enacted New York State budget increased foundation aid by $1.4 billion. And that was at or near the recommendation by the New York State Regents. The New York State Regents makes a budgetary recommendation each and every year. Usually the enacted budget is far short of that. In this budget, districts received either a 2 or 3% increase in foundation aid. 2% for most districts, 3% really for rural districts who were experiencing a decrease in enrollment and as a result had seen further decreases in their foundation aid. But the other critical part of determining the foundation aid increase was to look at how much the district had been funded of their promised foundation aid. So New York State had been promised foundation aid at $24 million. We were at $12.1 million. We were less than half of that 60%. So The state looked at the districts, and there were probably about 70 throughout the state who had not received even 60% of that promised state aid. North County had received just 49.2% of the formula. And so we were readjusted to 60% of full formula funding. So this represented an increase of $3.234 million in foundation aid from budgetary year 2020 to budgetary year 2021. So in 2020, our foundation aid was $12,125,223. That was frozen from the previous year, school year 2019-2020. In this budgetary year, our foundation aid is now up to $15,389,319. You will also remember, too, that when we met on our first night on March 1st, the governor's budget, the executive budget, was talking about consolidating expense-based aid into a category called services aid. So those expense-based aid that aid was predicated on what the district spent in certain areas like transportation, for example, or BOE services. School districts, based upon their wealth, receive that aid back in a ratio. So in the case of North County, that is about 50%, for example, on BOCES aid. So, to make it clear, if we spend $1 million with BOCES, perhaps buying technology or other services through them, in return, we would receive half of that back, $500,000 the following year. So we were pleased to see that expense-based aids were not consolidated and that they were still held separate. There were about 11 of them, I believe. That's very good because essentially it makes the budgeting process more predictable. You know what you spent the previous year, so therefore you can calculate and understand what you will receive the next year. And this was very important as well. If you remember in that budget that we presented, and that is the executive budget, which was presented on March 1st, federal funding supplanted the state effort. So in the case of North County, it looked as if we were had been given an increase in state aid by $1.5 million. But in fact, we were actually cut by about $5 million because if you look at the total state commitment, it was substantially less than it was by about $5 million the previous year. So all of this led to substantial concerns about falling off a financial cliff when the federal funding occurred. So what is interesting to note is now that the federal aid is held off to the side. So tonight we will speak briefly about the federal aid and how it is to be spent, but we are not using any of that stimulus federal aid in our budgetary planning. That really should be kept off to the side. It should be funding sustainable activity. It should not be used to cover a budget because essentially that money will be going away. And right now, quite honestly, every school district in the state of New York is working through the parameters, the guidelines of that aid so that they can make wise decisions by the July 1 due date when we have to have a plan. So those are three big news items that occurred as a result of the enacted New York State budget. I think, does anybody have any questions on that at this point in time? So why don't we move to the next slide? I will work with Mr. Hoot here, and when we can take a look at it. So this is the side by side here. So as you take a look at foundation aid, you can see the increase that North Colony received from 21-22, that roughly 3.2 million plus to $15,389,313. In the executive budget, you see services aid that has been taken out of there because we're not going down that road. We are still keeping the expense-based aids in our budget. So in that case, we now segment out BOCE's aid, which is 1.5 million there. Hardware and technology aid at about 84,000. Software, library, and textbook aid, that's 507,000 approximately. Our transportation aid, which is based again on our expenses, a little over 4 million. Public excess cost and private excess costs, they are also expense-based aids. They are for high-cost programs to serve our students. And so you can see public excess cost is around 618,000. Private excess cost, 261,000. The supplemental public excess cost is $531. And so this is always difficult to track because it's $531. Mr. Hoot, it goes back a few years, correct?
Goes back to the 2008-2009 timeframe and has remained steady throughout that period of time. Statewide, it's not a big aid category. It's about $4.3 million statewide in total.
And it's probably in there because of some held harmless provision. It's true, I think we are the only school in the capital region to receive this, and it is an aid of $531. Building aid is also an expense-based aid, and that's up to 3.45 million. And our operating reorganization, so you can see that was a substantial boost from the executive budget. And operating reorganization incentive, that still remains the same. And this is the last year we realized some aid from the Maplewood annexation. So that was approximately 30 million that the state paid out over 14 years. It paid it at a maximum of about 2.8 million for the first 5 years of that aid grant, and then decreased it by the $285,000 amount over 9 years after that. So as you can see here, our subtotal, it has us up about 4.6 million from the executive budget, and it's up at $26,208,099. The STAR payment was really not utilized as state aid. That was something that was different in the executive budget. There is no local district funding adjustment because we do not have federal dollars supplanting state commitment. And so now we are at a total of $26,208,099. Now, you see at the bottom as set-asides, you see the two stimulus money. So this is stimulus stimulus 2 and stimulus 3. That's 5.661 and 3.661. So it's a little over $9.2 million in stimulus aid, and that is set off to the side. Mr. Hoot, do you have anything you want to add to this at all?
No, just to keep in mind that this is a comparison between what the executive budget was as presented in the legislative budget. Our budget, which we'll go over later in terms of aid, will be slightly different than this, but we wanted to show mainly what it meant for the federal money to not supplant the state money. And if you look at the line item, the state subtotal, then you can see the drastic difference in comparison and contrasting between the executive budget with using the federal dollars to supplant the state monies and the legislative budget that does not.
So why don't we go to the next slide here? So when we take a look here at the federal funding that has been made available to us, CARES 1 in March of 2020, that yielded $541,000. CARES 2 occurred in December 2020, that yielded $5.6 million. And the American Rescue Act in March of 2021 yielded $3.66 million. So the American Rescue Act does come with stipulations attached to it, and 20% of that act must be, that act allowance must be reserved to address learning loss using evidence-based interventions. Could be a summer learning program, a summer enrichment program, an extended day, a comprehensive after-school program, or extended school year program. Plus, in addition, districts must, and this is important, ensure that interventions respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on economically disadvantaged students, children with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. So again, the imperative that we have been given by the federal government is that we must address the needs of the entire student, and that we also must really focus on equity and address the needs of students who have been disproportionately impacted not only by this pandemic, but by many other circumstances prior to the pandemic. So let's go to the next slide.
Joe, can I ask a question?
Yes, you can, Sandy, sure.
Sorry, the 20% that requires that meet these two bullets, or does the 20% have to meet the first bullet and the entire 100% has to meet the second bullet? Like, what happens with the other 80%, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Oh, I think there are a variety of things, and we'll go over that the funding could be dedicated to. Yeah.
Right, I'm jumping ahead, sorry.
No, and I'm sorry for being a little slow on the uptick there, so, yeah.
It's a good question, though. So that 20% is reserved. We have to earmark 20% for either summer or extended school day, after school, extended school year activities. And then those activities, that second bullet, that defines how we handle those. So they have to be research-based, and they have to also be specific to help close the gap for some learners who may have had an even worse impact because of the pandemic. And then there's a bigger list that Joe will go over shortly for the other 80%, which is quite exhaustive, the list.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So when we look at these parameters here, and Sandy, hopefully this gives you a little more clarity on that. And honestly, everyone is still working at unpacking these. And I want to emphasize it too. We really are looking at two separate issues here. So tonight we're looking at the general fund, the budget that our voters will vote on. Federal funding is off to the side, and primarily because that is not a permanent revenue stream. So I think, we want to talk about that. We want to talk about what our tasks will be going forward. And we want to talk about the parameters so that we can help further this understanding. So the plans for the use of the federal funds must be developed with community input. And that, we have to develop these plans and post them by July of this year, by July 2021. And we really have to be very mindful of this fact, and I can't stress this anymore, that anything that is expense to the grant is temporary, or there's an articulated plan as to how the district will cover the costs once federal aid is no longer there. So it is folly to say we have all this money and to put lasting, permanent expenditures in this grant, because the grant goes away as of September 2024. So sustainability is the operative word here when we look at how we use this grant money. So that is why we are not including any grant money in our discussion this evening. We will have to take a look at and look at it thoughtfully, get the input from our internal and external school communities, and then articulate that plan and publish it by July of this year. So we are still awaiting further information regarding process. We are told it will be coming out at the end of the month. The Regents has given some guidance on it. And, as we find out more, we will be able to know more and do more. But it is very time sensitive. July is not far away. There is a community involvement piece of this, as well as, very thoughtful planning longer term about what are we trying to do here? Are we providing recovery from the pandemic? And if we are looking at something that is longer lasting and sustainable, then we have to articulate how that will occur. Ms. Skills, do you want to add anything to this at all?
It's interesting that they do give us at least till July, and something that Mr. Kaur had said earlier is it would be very easy to just charge up a bill. And we're trying to be very intentional in finding the kinds of interventions that will best meet the needs of our students in the short term. That is really the goal of the act. It's to shore up whatever was lost. So it's a process for us of identifying the students and then identifying what the needs are and then aligning the right interventions. And so when we had our budget discussion, it really made sense for us to say, this is a lot of federal money, which really can be a game changer, but we have to do it in a way that really aligns with what we need for our students in this particular district. And so we've already started that process and started those conversations, and we will be continuing with a community committee as well, so that we can help to have a more comprehensive response to our return to school after this pandemic.
Thank you. So why don't we move to the next slide? And so, again, Sandy, start going back to your question here. So this is a range of allowable expenses, and it's pretty broad reaching here. So again, activities to address the unique needs of low-income children or students. And that could be students, children with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, migrant students, homeless students, youth in foster care, and it could be outreach, it could be delivery of specific services, but being specific how we'll meet the needs of specific populations. And then going to another direction here, purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities. Okay, educational technology. Mental health supports and mental health services, including evidence-based full-service community schools. Very important here, because we've heard repeatedly from our school community, from our counselors, from our students, from our families, about the need for, more mental health support. Again, showing the wide range here. School facility repairs and improvements to enable operation of schools to reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards. So that also is a consideration there. And then, just a very generic category here, other activities necessary to maintaining operations and continuity of services and continuing to employ existing staff. So, Sandy, was that helpful on that? You can see it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty broad in terms.
Pretty broad, yep. And you have to July to figure it out. Wow.
Exactly.
And one thing I would add is this is not even an exhaustive list. We just sort of cherry pick these to show the broad range. But one thing I do want to say that I think is interesting is that the fourth bullet down about full service community schools. As Mr. Murphy is retiring and we surveyed the community about what they were looking for and ideas for the next principal and how Shaker High School could become even better, there were many comments about having it be more of a community school, a community hub. And so it's interesting to see that in this grant because we got a lot of feedback about that in our survey. So that's something we'll be looking at closely.
One of the things it seems to me, just from my, arm's length distance, it's going to be hard to know what the long-term impacts are when so many kids are still in a hybrid or remote learning situation. And you have to do this by July. And, by July, that's looming large in the windshield.
It really is.
Right. But I know you guys are up to the challenge. That's one thing I do have a great deal of faith and confidence in, that if anybody's going to do it, it's our North Colony administrators that are going to get this done.
Thank you. That's humbling.
Yeah, you deserve it.
Let's move to the next slide here.
Mr. Core, can I ask a follow-up question to Sandy's question?
You sure can.
So we have that list of allowable categories. It's not exhaustible, but one of them, or not exhaustive as you mentioned, but one of them was the example you gave was like cleaning supplies or other things that we might need to use to make the school safe. We obviously spent a good chunk of money on that this past year. Are we allowed to sort of retroactively apply incoming grant money to expenses incurred over the last year that we spent in response to the pandemic?
I'll let Mr. Hoot go more in depth than that, but I think so. That might be the best answer I can give.
Okay, and maybe I'm getting ahead of you here. But
No, it's a very good question. And Mr. Hoot, do you want to answer that with a little more certitude than I did?
We are anxiously awaiting very specific guidance from the state education department. However, I can say everything that we have read indicates there is the opportunity to go back as far as March of 2020.
Okay, thank you.
So it could be possible. Okay, thank you. So, Mrs. Nardolillo and Mr. Vondell, so I will just basically review what the next schedules are, a review really of what has already been presented. There will be, I'll just go down through these and, if there are board questions or concerns or objections, we certainly can address them at this time. And then on the second slide related to staffing, there are some new positions. So you can see the asterisk, the librarian, the social worker, and Mr. Kraft is here to address the groundskeeper. Ms. Skeels, do you want to address the librarian and the social worker?
Sure. So the 1.0 librarian for the middle school, many years ago, when the junior high was bigger, before we had a retirement, we had a long history of having 2 librarians at the middle school. So next year, the 6th grade will come in. Our projected enrollment is somewhere in the mid 1400s. The state suggests at the secondary level, 1 librarian per 1,000 kids. So to give us, we have 1 there. A second one would give us 2.0. That would put us slightly over, but would return us to the level of staffing we'd had previously. And we think with all the work that we're doing with literacy, having the extra support in the library would be beneficial. So that would be enrollment driven, if you will, for the middle school. The 1.0 social worker is a new position, but is related to the middle school. So the middle school, again, will have 1,400 students. They have a team of 4 school counselors. Those used to be called guidance counselors. The state now calls them school counselors. And they have 1 student assistance counselor. So they have a team of 5 for 1,400 students. So what we would like to do is bring one of our existing social worker positions over to the middle school to be full-time in the middle school, so that they can now have a team of 6 counselors in the building for the 1,400 students. That would put them very much on par with the ratios that we have at the high school, very comparable. In doing that, then the 1.0 social worker that we have, we would replace by putting a 0.5 social worker specific to Bout Hills. Bout Hills is the only school that obviously will continue to grow to be 4 deep permanently. So once Bout Hills becomes 4 deep permanently, it will have anywhere from 150 to 200 more students than any of the other elementary schools, and even more so than Loudonville. So in order to keep them comparable with the level of service, they would have a 0.5 devoted. The other social workers in the district would still split Latham Ridge, Forts Ferry, Blue Creek, and Southgate. And then 0.5 of that would be at the high school. So it would be 0.5 at Bout Hills, 0.5 at the high school. And then Mr. Kraft wants to speak to the groundskeeper, or Mr. Hoot?
Yes. Mr. Kraft.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
So with the groundskeeper, what we're looking to do is protect the investment from the project in our athletic fields at the middle school and the high school, and kind of try to create a dedicated grounds team to help with that and help support the other schools. And it's also kind of my way of dealing with the extra building square footage, because then you're not taking someone that's fixing something inside the building to go work on the groundskeeping duties. So it would be extremely helpful.
So I think at this point in time, so you can see those were the additions from the previous meeting that we had. I believe it was just before the break. So are there any, I would ask Mrs. Nardillo or Mr. Bondell if the board has any questions on those positions.
So we will follow the process that we've been following all along. If our Board of Education has any questions, I ask that you state them now, and then we could open it up to our budget representatives. For anyone who is on our live stream, if you have any questions, they can be addressed by emailing us at communications@ncolony.org. It's right on the screen. So does the Board of Education have anything they'd like to ask at this time?
Would it be, Mrs. Nardillo, would you like us to go back to the previous slide so people could look at that too? See if
you could. I mean, I know the Board of Education has it. I believe the community representatives have it. If you want to just put it up there for a second so that anyone that's live streaming can take a look at it. And while they're looking at that, we can ask questions. So if anyone has questions, I do not have, when we're sharing screens, I only have Joe. So I just speak out and
Mary,
I wonder if
why
you
don't
want
we-
to stop the screen sharing just
That
for
would-
so you can see.
There-
Okay, that's fine. So Sam, I know you have a question and please.
Yeah,
go
it was about the groundskeeper position.
Mhm.
So, Brian, you mentioned that it was in large part to handle the fields and other facilities at the middle school and the high school. But this is a new position, right? Does that just mean that things have been sort of like there just hasn't been enough? We haven't had the personnel we needed to do the maintenance that's been needed at that in those facilities up until now. Like I understand that there are some new things coming from the capital project. But does that just mean that you've been pulling people from other things that like within the buildings that need to be done in order to deal with the groundskeeping up until now? And this is a way to sort of focus on that a little bit more so that other people can do the rest of the work that needs to be done?
Yes. Yeah. So there was, some fields added and some of the fields we have are upgraded, but the way the grounds system was kind of set up was, basically 3 people take care of all the fields, take care of the rest of the schools. And then we supplement that from the maintenance shop, technically 1 shop, but for the maintenance shop, do the mowing and garbage pickup and playground maintenance and all that type of stuff by supplementing it. And in mowing, you have to mow. So, if you can't take the guy and say, you got to get out there, you got to do it. So you're taking someone out of a building that could be working in a building and putting them on that mower to do that day, which is fine. It would be nice to be able to concentrate on both a little better, especially we did increase building sizes as well. So,
Okay, thank you.
Is the groundskeeper seasonal or is that a 12-month position?
it's 12-month position with seasonal hours. So what we're looking to do with a little bit as well is summer and winter would be normal groundskeeping hours. In the fall and spring sport seasons, we'd be rotating it to work till 4 o'clock. So we have last minute help with the games and setup and things like that. So we take care of everything we're supposed to for the athletic department as well.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, then I guess, Joe, you can move on. Before you move on though, I just want to make sure that the Board of Education is aware that we're looking at a proposed budget for 13.7 FTEs, $1,359,673. So, as long as we're all okay with that, then we'll move on to the next section, Joe.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Mary.
then I think we're okay with that. Yep.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the screen share then?
Yes, thanks.
So this is our equipment schedule. So we are holding our equipment budget constant. You can see the various categories that were broken down there. We had separate nights for equipment and for instructional technology. So what was presented on those nights represents what is in this budget here.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the board or the community representatives? Okay, we can keep going, Joe.
Thank you. And so you're now looking at maintenance projects. Mr. Kraft presented these. And these are projects that are not part of capital projects. The building conditions survey is something that is required by the state of New York. That's a cost of $75,000 to take on. We have playground surfaces that have to be upgraded, parking lot striping, blind replacement, and small abatement projects. That's a total of $166,000.
Any questions? And again, these are all items, schedules that we've already been over. Okay, go right ahead.
These are interfund transfers. Essentially, we have a transfer to our school lunch fund, and that's to fund program losses, negative account balances. That's $250,000. Transfer to special aid fund. We have a local share, that's 20% of the summer special education program that funds that 20% at $225,000. So our total transfers are $475,000.
Questions? Okay, Joe, thank you.
And new programs and initiatives, we're looking at this as, the Bridges ENL program, Ms. Muldoon explained that during our new program. That 0.2 FTE that we discussed here, that's contained in our staffing request. So we're not representing a dollar amount here. And Innovation Spaces has no impact on the general fund, so it's budget neutral.
Okay. So, I just want to get the bottom line here of our expenditure budget. Or I guess we can wait till we go over the revenue and then we'll get to the bottom line on that. Thank you.
Right. So why don't we move to the next slide here?
Please.
So, okay, so this is our revenue budget, okay, and so you can see here that these represent the revenue sources that we will get. So we're looking at property taxes as a revenue source. That is our main revenue source. So property taxes amount to $89,438,564. That's a change of $1,223,551. That's an increase of 1.39%. Our pilots, and these are special arrangements made with local regional authorities. And so our pilots have decreased by 281,000 from the previous year. This year, they're 212,000 approximately. You can see our foundation aid. Just to explain this, so when we looked at the 2021 foundation aid, we had the number of 12.1. Last year we budgeted 9.7 million because at that time the state was threatening to reduce foundation aid by another 20%. So that you can see that number of 5.6 million. The true number is because it's 12.1 million that it's up from, but that's why you see that when we compare it budget to budget. Building aid is at 5.7 million. That's up 2.1 million. Annexation aid is down $285,000. Transportation aid is down slightly by about $35,000. BOCE's aid is about the same, 1.4 million, down 85,000. High cost aid is up slightly by 45,000. Materials aid has decreased by 8,000. It's almost the same at 591,000. And all other state aids are down slightly by 97,000. So if you take a look at this, considering the budgeted amount of foundation aid, 9.725 from 2021, anticipating that 20% reduction did not materialize, we represent this as a $7.3 million increase in state revenue, state aid. So, and let's continue on here. So we, because this is a rather lengthy chart, and in previous years there would be binders handed out and you could take a look at it. So we have to carry this out over multiple slides. So tuition and special education, that's down 76,000. The big bulk of our tuition payments come from Manans. Most of Manans' 8th grade comes to Shaker High School for their high school education. Interest earnings just reflect what everybody's experienced in the markets with the savings accounts and the like. They're down drastically from 50,000 to 5,000. All other revenue sources are down about 91,000. So we are using less designated fund balance. That's due to our increase in foundation aid. So that's down to 3.6 million. It's a decrease of 1.2 million. We've decided to increase our TRS reserve in anticipating greater obligations there. That's up by 90,000. The rest of these reserves, ERS, compensated absences, and unemployment, are being held constant. So our total reserves budgeted are down by 1.1 million in this budget. So we would look at a total revenue budget of $124,977,067. That's up almost $7 million or 5.93%. And we can now go to the next slide. And this is our proposed expenditure budget. So if we look first at staffing here, the dollar change in staffing, it's up from 67.2 million to 70.3 million, a dollar change of 3.1 million, up 4.70%. Fringe benefits are up from 29.8 million to 31.8 million, an increase of about $2 million or 6.82%. So total salary and fringe benefits up to $102,243,205. That's an increase of about $5.2 million or 5.35%. Textbooks and library books, okay, we are proposing an increase of about $15,000 there. We could go to the next slide. And these are our other expenditures here. So our utility costs, we're estimating those to be down about 4,000. BOE services up by 1.2 million. Special education department down by 57,000. Operations and maintenance down by 201,000. Diesel gasoline held constant at 270,000. Insurance up slightly by almost $2,000. Property tax refunds, $100,000 held constant. Workers' compensation, $53,000 held constant. Health services to other districts, those are for services for our children who attend private and parochial schools in other districts. So if a student in North County attended, for example, Albany Academy, that is in the city of Albany, so we would have to pay the city of Albany to provide health services for those students. And charter schools tuition, that's down slightly by $5,000. All other departments down by about $125,000. So these represent the total contractual services that we have. That's up to 11.4. It's an increase of $829,168. Just a note here about BOCES, that is up substantially, but please note that it does make sense to buy services when you can through BOCES because you do get back 50% of that in aid the following year. Approximately. It depends on the program and the like. Mr. Hoot, do you have any thing you want to add on revenues or expenditures at this point? We haven't.
No, you covered it, Mr. Core. Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide. And continuing with expenditures here, so our debt service has increased by $962,000. That makes sense as the expenses for the building project come online. Interfund transfers, you saw those. They are at $475,000, up $220,000. Equipment is basically held constant at $1.7 million. And supplies, we have decreased our supply budget by $224,000. So if we take a look at the total expenditure budget, and this is ultimately what our voters vote on, they vote on the spending plan of the district. So that is, for this year, is $124,977,067. It is up $6 million, almost $7 million, 5.93%. So what you can see here is that school districts are entities that have to present a balanced budget. Revenues meet expenditures, and this would be our total expenditure budget plan. So you can see where we're getting our revenues, and you can see where we plan to spend it.
Mhm. Okay, does the board have any questions? For the folks that may be just tuning in tonight, we have actually, it seems like we went through this rather quickly tonight, but we have dedicated evenings to each one of these schedules. So this is something that we have been doing throughout this budget process. Do we have any questions, Joe, from our email from previous meetings or?
That's great. I'll check in with Julia. Do we have any questions that have been submitted by email?
No, Mr. Core, there have been no questions that have come in.
Thank you.
Right. So I guess before
Mary, I have a
It's
question.
Sandy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sandy.
Sorry. You probably can't see me. I'm on another screen here. In other years, we've had, breakout below the line of additions like staff salaries or additional staff. So I assume this year, the numbers that we're seeing for staff salaries include the new positions. They have to. It doesn't appear anyplace else.
That is correct, Sandy.
Okay, so it's a $3.2 million increase, but about $1.3 million of it is the new positions. Then,
Yes.
and then on the fringes, just curious, almost 7%, 6.82% increase. What's driving that? Is it health insurance or retirement contributions? Is there anything in particular that's driving that?
I would probably say all of the above. Mr. Hoop, do you want to?
Just one point of clarification. The additional staffing, that's almost 1.4 million. That's inclusive of both salary and benefits. So it's influencing both of those categories.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So some of that increase on fringes is in that 1.4 million, and it's split between the 1.4 is split between salaries and fringes.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
The building aid increases, is that because we finished parts of projects on the big bond project and we're starting to see that money come back to us? Is that what that is?
That's correct, Ron. We'll be filing final cost reports beginning this spring and then throughout next year and probably even into maybe the fall of the following year. So the aid will start accelerating next year and the year after.
Okay.
Do we have any questions from our community representatives? Okay, then I presume, Scott, you're going to go over the property tax cap?
I would love to, Mary. Thank you for asking.
That's a good way to wind down the evening.
So we always, as always, we start with the current year tax levy at $88.2 million. And then we multiply that times the tax base growth factor. And that factor is provided to all districts by the state real property division. We then get into the additions and subtractions, kind of above the line and below the line. The next two items, the pilots for the current year, 2021, and the capital exclusion for the current year. So the pilots are an addition, the capital exclusion is a subtraction. We then get down to a net number of $87.9 million, which we then apply the annual growth factor to, which can be as high as 2%, but with inflation low, it's only at 1.23% in this fiscal year. So doing the math on that brings us to just about $89 million. Again, we apply the capital exclusion for next year and the pilots for next year, which brings us down to a net $89.4 million. That is a 1.39% increase, and that is the tax levy number that was included in the proposed revenue budget. This is just one final note is this is a slight modification, an update from what was preliminarily presented in early March, and that is the result of the Transportation Department amended their proposal for bus purchases next year on the 30 passenger buses to save about $161,000 in bus purchases for next year, and that's also reflected in the expenditure budget. And that bus purchases are a component of calculating the capital exclusion. Therefore, we spend less on buses, the capital exclusion is reduced, and it brings our tax levy limit down by that $161,000. The earlier number was, the earlier percentage rather was 1.57. We're now at 1.39.
And Mr. Hoot, I think another important thing. So this is our tax rate. What is some of the preliminary information that we have on assessment growth in the town?
So preliminarily, the current assessment growth is at 1.19%. And that's not the final number, as the assessor's office has not gotten to the final number, but that number is as recent as this week. So if you were to take that into account and net out the assessment growth against the tax levy increase of 1.39, that would leave just a 0.2% differential.
So that would be the tax levy impact, what people would actually pay. So it would be, as I said, if that held as it is today, it would be a 0.2% increase in the tax bill or assessment per thousand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying. That's always very confusing. Even though we do it every year, it's easily confusing. Okay, are there any other questions?
I don't have a question, Mary, but if I could make a comment, because I feel a little badly after going through, the really tremendously good news that came out of the state budget for, I guess it would be inappropriate for us to cheer, but I just have to say out loud that is some really good news for North Colony coming out of the state's budget, and that we got leveled up to the 60%, and that they didn't supplant the federal money, and that they didn't consolidate into services aids. All three really big reliefs for us. So and to the extent that you're lobbying, going down to visit Steck and Breslin, thank you for that. It's very much appreciated, and coming in with a tax levy increase on what looks to me like a really good budget. I think it's, checks a lot of boxes for us. And
I think that's an important point, Sandy, that we are grateful to our New York State legislators for their advocacy for the local.
Yeah, it's not going unnoticed. At least I didn't jump up and say anything when I saw those numbers, but yeah, it's very noteworthy.
And thank you to any community members who wrote or contacted them on our behalf.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So while we are sharing our gratitude, I'm going to just take a moment to extend that on behalf of the Board of Education to our central office team headed by Mr. Kaur, Ms. Skeels, and Mr. Hoot, and all of the district administrators and directors that have helped craft this budget, to our committee members, and to my fellow board members. And I'm just very grateful that this is a budget that will meet the needs of all of our students. And great job, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll go over, Joe, do you want to go over the schedule for the...
I will, Mary. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. And so, thank you. So, as you can see, the board will formally adopt the proposed budget on Wednesday night's meeting and the property tax report card. So that's Wednesday, April 21. We will have a public forum on the budget and a meet the candidates night on May 5th, and Tuesday, May 18th is the, May 5th is a Wednesday. Tuesday, May 18th is the annual election and budget vote. And that will be held at the Goodrich School. So still always welcome questions on our budget. You can email them to communications@ncolony.org. I would like to express my gratitude to the Board of Education, as always, for their continued wonderful service to our community. I'd like to express gratitude to our community budget members for their service and their volunteerism on behalf of our children and on behalf of our school community, and to all our school community, our administrators who are attending these meetings and are on this call. Thank you for your hard work and your input as well. So we look forward. We have some great and good challenges ahead of us, and we're excited to be meeting them and living in a great time. So there you go.
And to Jane, thank Jane, because she has really done a great job of pulling us all together during
Yes, Jane, you're great.
Yes. Bravo.
No, I was just going to say gratitude is the word for the evening. There's no doubt about that. We're grateful for each other and grateful for the leadership of the district, and just grateful to have this real, it's a great budget, and we can be really proud of going to the community with this budget. And we have always appreciated the community's support for our budget, and we look forward to that kind of support this year as well. So I'll take a motion to lead the budget committee meeting. Mrs. Pangburn, I'll take a second for that. Mr. Johnson, all in favor, and we will adjourn with that. All right. Good night, everybody, and thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Nardolillo and Mr. Vondell as well. Thank you. Thank you both.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you very much.